She tried to cut my water supply, but this HOA president was about to learn I held the secret to her entire luxury neighborhood's water, and I was about to shut it all. Secret to her entire luxury neighborhood's water, and I was about to shut it all. The morning sun was barely kissing the lake, painting it in hues of soft gold, when the brutal shriek of metal ripped through the peace. I stood on my porch, coffee cup forgotten in my hand, watching horror as some HOA thug, brandishing a reciprocating saw, severed my water line. Sparks flew against my gravel driveway, a grotesque ballet of destruction, while a smirking man in a cheap suit filmed it all, as if documenting a glorious conquest. In that gut-wrenching moment, I knew Valerie Caldwell, our self-proclaimed HOA queen and a certified nightmare, had just made the gravest error of her entitled existence. My name is Greg Thornton. 40 years I dedicated my life to designing and building the very arteries that brought water to this entire county. All I ever wanted was a quiet retirement in my beloved lakefront cabin, the sacred spot where I'd released my dear wife Mary's ashes to the wind. But Valerie, in her infinite arrogance, had declared my rustic sanctuary a blight on her precious property values. Oh, the irony. She had no earthly idea that every single drop of water gracing her opulent $500,000 mansion had to first traverse the pipes that by law were under my control. Before you even think of typing, just sue her. Trust me, I had a plan brewing, far more satisfying than any courtroom drama. How would you have reacted? What would you do? Tell me in the comments below, and let me rewind a bit to explain how this madness began. Just 3 short months prior, I was living the dream. Each dawn I'd stroll to my dock, a steaming mug cradled in my hands, inhaling that intoxicating blend of pine and fresh lake air, a fragrance money could never buy. The comforting crunch of gravel beneath my boots, the weathered cedar siding of my cabin. It needed paint, yes, but it breathed character, history. This wasn't some flashy resort. This was home, our home. Mary and I had discovered this charming 1960s retreat during our last anniversary trip. She'd fallen head over heels for the haunting calls of the loons at dawn, the ethereal way the morning mist danced across the water's surface. After 4 decades of navigating the complex world of municipal water systems for Clearbrook County, designing every major pipeline, untangling pressure puzzles that baffled even the brightest engineers, I truly believed I'd earned my peace. Mary left me 2 years ago, a victim of that cruel disease, cancer. I scattered her ashes from that very dock, on a morning eerily similar to the countless ones we'd shared during our 37 beautiful years of marriage. This cabin was meant to be our sanctuary, our shared haven. After she passed, it became my lifeline, my fragile tether to sanity. And then Valerie Caldwell sashayed into my life. Can you picture the most entitled, self-important person you've ever encountered? Now multiply that by 10, infuse her with a law degree, and plant her in an extravagant lakefront mansion. That's Valerie. She pilots a gleaming white BMW, always parked with a blatant disregard for lines, straddling 2 spaces. She's perpetually dressed as if she's en route to a high-stakes court appearance, even when merely checking her mailbox. And that clipboard? Oh dear heavens, that woman clutched her clipboard as if it were a sacred scripture, an immutable tablet of law. For 8 long years she'd ruled the Whisper Lake Estates Homeowners Association as her personal kingdom. 12 board members, yes, but they were nothing more than her bowing royal court, nodding in robotic agreement to whatever decrees she capriciously issued that week. My first glimpse of her in action was at a community barbecue. Some poor soul's sprinkler was innocently watering his driveway alongside his lawn. An honest mistake, one that happens to anyone. But Valerie, clipboard clutched, marched over, actually wrote him a citation, and declared loud enough for the entire neighborhood to hear that property maintenance standards exist for a reason. In hindsight, I should have known then that I was next on her hit list. The real trouble began when I naively attended my first and what I hoped would be my last HOA meeting. I thought, be neighborly, Greg. Biggest mistake of my retirement, hands down. The moment I stepped into that community center, Valerie's eyes locked onto me, a predatory radar system targeting an incoming threat. Oh, she sneered, not even bothering to mask her disdain. You must be the gentleman with the rustic cabin. Rust. She spat the word as if I were operating a clandestine meth lab on my property. The meeting itself was precisely what you'd expect from a power-hungry control freak, with far too much time on her hands. 45 excruciating minutes devoted to the precise height of mailboxes, another 20 agonizing minutes on unauthorized bird feeders, supposedly attracting undesirable wildlife. And then came the pivotal moment, the one that irrevocably shifted everything. "We need to address water usage compliance," Valerie announced, pulling out a thick folder that reeked of officialdom, but felt entirely fabricated. "Properties built before 1985 are strictly required to limit consumption to 2. This regulation is crucial to protect our community aquifer from depletion." Her gaze, sharp and cold, pierced mine across the room. "Some residents," she declared, her eyes still fixed on me, "are utilizing both well water and lake access, which constitutes a double violation of our conservation covenant." Now remember, I dedicated 4 decades to water management. In my early days, I'd learned that developers often craft HOA rules without a fundamental grasp of actual water law. Properties grandfathered in like mine typically cannot be retroactively bound by covenants they never agreed to. But before I could even articulate this legal reality, she was already steamrolling onto the next agenda item. The meeting concluded with her making a beeline for me. "Miss Thornton," she purred, her voice dripping with manufactured concern, "I sincerely hope you'll bring your usage into voluntary compliance. It would be truly unfortunate if we were compelled to take more decisive action." 2 weeks later, the certified letter arrived, a demand for $5,000 in water violation fines, supposedly based on an emergency board vote that flouted every single rule of proper HOA governance. 30 days to pay up and install her ridiculous monitoring equipment, or face a utility shutoff. That's when the chilling realization hit me. This wasn't about water conservation, nor was it about property values. This was about raw, unadulterated power and control. This was about Valerie Caldwell ruthlessly purging anyone who didn't conform to her pristine vision of lakefront perfection. But she had chosen the absolute wrong retired engineer to intimidate. You know that primal instinct when you accidentally poke a sleeping bear? Well, Valerie was about to discover the furious awakening of a retired engineer with boundless time and 40 years of unparalleled technical expertise. Her next move arrived precisely 2 weeks after that thinly veiled threat. I was out on my dock at sunrise, savoring the comforting scent of coffee mingling with the morning mist, when the ominous rumble of diesel engines shattered the tranquility, echoing across the water. 3 trucks, like a small invading army, pulled into my driveway at 7. Valerie, it seemed, believed in psychological warfare through sleep deprivation. Out stepped 2 men in matching polo shirts, clipboards and official-looking badges in hand. Behind them, Valerie emerged from her pristine BMW like a general surveying her battlefield. The jarring sound of truck doors slamming was quite possibly the most aggressive noise this peaceful lake had endured in years. "Mr. Thornton," she called out, her voice laced with that sickly sweet, faked tone people adopt just before they utterly ruin your day. "These are certified water compliance inspectors. We're here to install monitoring equipment on your well pump." I walked over, my coffee mug still firmly in hand. "Morning, Valerie. Do you happen to have a warrant for that?" To my utter surprise, she actually produced a laminated document. This woman, I swear, laminated everything as if preserving historical artifacts. "The HOA covenant," she recited with practiced ease, "grants us access rights for utilities inspection. It's all perfectly legal." I had, of course, meticulously read that covenant front to back after her little meeting charade. What she was waving around was about as legally binding as a grocery list. But her inspectors were already unloading power tools and heading straight for my well house. For the next hour, I was subjected to the delightful symphony of drilling and hammering as these buffoons installed flow meters on equipment they clearly didn't comprehend. The older guy kept gawking at my pressure tank as if it were alien technology. The younger one actually had the audacity to ask where the water came out. 40 years I'd spent fixing problems caused by precisely this kind of amateur hour nonsense. As they blundered along, my neighbor Helen Miller shuffled over with a thermos of coffee, a knowing look in her eyes, the look old-timers get when they've seen this exact movie before. Helen had lived on this lake since the 1970s, surviving 3 hurricanes, 2 economic crashes, and apparently multiple HOA presidents. "She's done this before," Helen whispered, her eyes darting towards Valerie, who was supervising the installation with the intensity of a space mission commander. "Remember the Kowalski family? Nice couple, lived in that blue cottage where the Hendersons are now." Valerie pulled the exact same routine. Bogus violations, endless harassment, made their lives utterly miserable until they were forced to sell. That's when the chilling pattern crystallized. This wasn't random isolated tyranny. This was a systematic campaign. Valerie had elevated HOA harassment to an art form, meticulously targeting anyone whose property dared to deviate from her rigid vision of luxury lakefront living. But here, oh here, she made her first colossal tactical error. You see, back when I first embarked on my journey in municipal water systems, I learned a crucial, undeniable truth. Always thoroughly research your opponent before engaging. So that very afternoon, I drove straight to the county courthouse and spent 3 grueling hours digging through property records, HOA and corporation documents, and covenant filings. What I unearthed was pure, unadulterated beauty in its elegant simplicity. The Whisper Lake Estates HOA had been incorporated in my cabin. It was built in 1963, a full 24 years before this neighborhood association even exists. Under state property law, properties that predate an HOA grandfathered properties cannot be retroactively bound by covenants they never agreed to sign. Valerie's entire legal foundation was built on nothing but shifting quicksand. I spent that entire evening meticulously drafting a response letter, citing specific statutes and irrefutable case law. It was professional, polite, and legally bulletproof. I demanded the immediate removal of their intrusive monitoring equipment and a complete cessation of all harassment based on her utterly invalid covenant claims. The next morning, I personally hand-delivered copies to every single member of the HOA board, the County Water Authority, and even Valerie's law firm. And just to be absolutely sure, I sent everything via certified mail, return receipt request. Because if 40 years in municipal government teaches you anything, it's the paramount importance of impeccable documentation. Valerie's response arrived with shocking speed. Instead of backing down like any rational human being confronted with undeniable legal facts, she doubled down with the kind of spectacular overreach that fills lawyers' pockets. Her next certified letter audaciously claimed my well pump was stealing groundwater from the community aquifer and threatened to file complaints with the county environmental agency. This woman, it seemed, genuinely believed she could outmaneuver someone who had literally designed the county's entire water distribution system. Do you know that moment in chess when your opponent makes a move so monumentally, unequivocally wrong that you have to double-check the board, convinced you must be missing something? That was precisely the sensation. Valerie was playing checkers, utterly oblivious, while I was orchestrating a complex chess problem she couldn't even perceive. The acrid smell of diesel exhaust from her contractors still clung to my driveway when a profound realization hit me. This wasn't going to conclude with polite legal letters and tiresome bureaucratic procedures. Valerie Caldwell had unequivocally declared war on the wrong retiree. It was time to unleash what 4 decades of water system expertise could accomplish when properly motivated. If Valerie imagined I would simply roll over and capitulate after her outrageous groundwater theft accusation, she was about to receive a stark lesson. Retired engineers don't retreat. We regroup. We counterattack with surgical precision. Her next maneuver was a masterclass in small-town politics at its most ugly. While I was away for a week visiting my ailing brother in Tampa, she orchestrated what she cunningly dubbed an emergency community meeting about water thieves endangering our neighborhood. The timing, of course, was no coincidence. Valerie had been tracking my comings and goings with the meticulousness of a surveillance operative. I learned about the meeting from Helen, who called me while I was sitting in a sterile hospital waiting room. "Greg, honey," she whispered urgently, "you absolutely need to know what that woman's been up to. She's got half the neighborhood convinced you're some kind of environmental criminal." Apparently, Valerie had gone full propaganda mode. She'd printed flyers brazenly featuring my photo, snatched from the county water department website without a shred of permission, claiming I was depleting the aquifer for my personal gain, while honest families watched their wells run dry. She even organized carpools, ensuring the meeting was packed with newer residents who understood absolutely nothing about local water systems. Her truly insidious stroke of genius was her fear campaign. She deliberately misled people, telling them that old-timers like me were grandfathered into unlimited water usage that would inevitably drain everyone else's wells. Utter nonsense, of course, but terrifyingly effective nonsense if your audience lacked even a basic understanding of hydrogeology. But Valerie, in her hubris, made one single crucial mistake. She scheduled the meeting for Thursday night, and I arrived home Wednesday. That Thursday evening, I strode into that community center, not empty-handed but armed with my laptop, a portable projector, and 40 years of irrefutable county water data. The place was absolutely packed, easily 60 people, the largest HOA turnout in years. Valerie had strategically positioned herself at the front, holding court like she was delivering a State of the Union address. She was mid-sentence,
pontificating about how certain selfish individuals were threatening our children's water security. When I cleared my throat from the back of the room, "Sorry I'm late," I announced, my voice carrying clearly to every corner. "Mind if I add some technical perspective to this discussion?" The color visibly drained from Valerie's face, as if someone had suddenly opened a valve. I calmly set up my equipment while she sputtered indignantly about proper meeting procedures and scheduled speakers only. Then I projected my first slide, 40 years of county aquifer data, unequivocally demonstrating stable water table levels and usage patterns that proved my cabin consumed less water than the average household, because it's just one guy living there. "Caldwell claims I'm stealing groundwater," I stated, clicking to my next slide, "but artesian wells like mine tap a completely different water table than the municipal supply system. They're simply not connected. It's basic geology, folk." I watched as confusion, then growing annoyance, flickered across the faces in the audience as they realized they had been fed a steady diet of utter misinformation. But I wasn't nearly finished educating them. "Here's something everyone should know," I continued, pulling up a county geological survey. "You can easily request your local water authority's aquifer data to debunk any bogus depletion claim. It's public information, and it shows precisely what I'm telling you now. There is no water shortage here." That's when Fred Kowalski, a Vietnam veteran built like a fire hydrant, with a quiet authority that commanded instant respect, rose from the middle of the room. "She did the exact same damn thing to us," he boomed, pointing a resolute finger at Valerie. "Lies. Harassment. She made our lives a living hell until we couldn't take it anymore and sold our place for half what it was worth." The room plunged into a stunned silence, broken only by the faint hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Then, as if on cue, other voices began to join in. The elderly Hendersons timidly admitted Valerie had threatened them over their unauthorized vegetable garden. A young couple tearfully revealed she'd been fining them relentlessly for their work van, claiming it violated commercial vehicle restrictions. A disabled veteran named Carlos proudly displayed documentation proving Valerie had actually attempted to ban his service dog from community areas. The pattern was now starkly, undeniably clear. Valerie systematically targeted anyone who didn't fit her narrow, elitist vision of a luxury community. Blue-collar retirees, struggling young families, honorable veterans, elderly folks on fixed incomes, anyone whose lifestyle dared to diverge from her country club fantasies. That's when Valerie completely lost her composure. "This is about maintaining property standards," she shrieked, her professional facade cracking like ice in a spring thaw. "Some people simply don't belong in a premium lakefront community. We have standards for a reason." The room erupted into an absolute frenzy. People were shouting, chairs scraped loudly across the floor, and Valerie's meticulously orchestrated meeting had devolved into a full-scale revolt against her tyrannical reign. But here's where things truly got interesting. Amidst the pandemonium, I noticed another figure had quietly slipped into the back of the room, Jane Ramirez from the County Water Authority. Jane and I had worked side by side for 15 years before my retirement. She met my gaze and offered a subtle knowing nod. After the meeting finally dissolved into utter chaos, and people began to file out, Jane approached me by the parking lot. The invigorating scent of cooling asphalt, mingling with the fresh lake breeze, provided the perfect, almost cinematic backdrop for what she told me next. "Greg," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, "you should know Valerie's been filing false complaints with our office for 3 years now. We've been quietly building a harassment case against her." Game changer. If I ever thought Valerie would simply retreat after being publicly exposed as a serial harasser, I profoundly underestimated the desperate lengths a cornered narcissist will go to protect her crumbling kingdom. Her counterattack arrived with the delicate subtlety of a freight train and twice the destructive potential. Monday morning I awoke to find official-looking legal papers crudely taped to my front door. Apparently proper service was far too dignified for this war. Valerie had retained Blackstone and Associates, a high-powered law firm specializing in HOA enforcement, possessing the moral flexibility of a weather vane. They were seeking an immediate injunction to shut off my water, claiming an imminent health emergency due to alleged septic contamination. The beautiful, exquisite irony. She was accusing my septic system of polluting the very aquifer she'd spent weeks insisting I was stealing from. But here's where Valerie truly showcased her genius for manipulation. That very same afternoon, the local newspaper ran a front-page story. Lake resident refuses water conservation compliance. The article brazenly painted me as a stubborn, defiant old-timer who flouted environmental regulations, while Valerie was portrayed as an environmental champion, bravely protecting precious community resources. Reading that piece was like watching someone describe a breathtaking sunset as merely an explosion. Technically accurate words meticulously arranged to construct a completely false, insidious picture. The reporter had clearly gleaned all his information solely from Valerie's legal team. No attempt to contact me, no independent investigation of the actual facts, just a regurgitation of her talking points, cloaked in journalistic language. According to this masterpiece, I was single-handedly threatening the lake's fragile ecosystem, while obstinately refusing all reasonable conservation measures. Now most people at this juncture would frantically hire an expensive attorney, but 40 years in municipal government instills a valuable lesson. Sometimes the most effective defense is forcing your opponent to prove their outlandish claims in front of people who actually comprehend the subject matter. Instead of lawyering up, I filed a pro se response, representing my counter-argument was elegantly simple. If Valerie truly wanted to claim environmental contamination, she could damn well prove it with actual verifiable evidence, instead of wild speculation and manufactured hysteria. I demanded comprehensive soil and water testing, at her expense, conducted by certified environmental laboratories, with the results meticulously reviewed by county health officials. Environmental health claims, after all, necessitate actual evidence, not the legal equivalent of blindly throwing spaghetti at a wall to see what sticks. The testing took 2 agonizing weeks, and likely cost Valerie's legal fund approximately worth every single penny for the sheer entertainment value alone. The results were pure poetry in scientific form. My property showed 0 contamination. In fact, it was cleaner than most lakefront lots. My septic system was functioning perfectly, well within all environmental standards. The soil samples revealed nothing more dangerous than happy earthworms and beneficial bacteria. But here's where the universe decided to flex its exquisite sense of humor. The comprehensive testing also, quite inadvertently, revealed that Valerie's own septic system had minor violations, an overflow issue that had been subtly leaching into the lake for months. Not dangerous, but undeniably deliciously ironic, given her grand environmental championship. More importantly, the property boundary survey, a prerequisite for the environmental assessment, unearthed something I had completely forgotten about for decades. The original 1963 deed for my cabin included an easement, something about perpetual access and maintenance authority over water infrastructure serving lakefront properties, back when this tranquil lake was nothing more than untouched wilderness and scattered fishing cabins. The county had needed to extend water service to the nascent property. The most efficient route for the main water line from the county system ran directly through what would eventually become my property. My predecessor, the brilliant civil engineer who built my cabin, William Hayes, had meticulously surveyed the entire project and negotiated easement rights that granted him legal authority over the infrastructure. Those rights, those precious legal rights, had transferred seamlessly with the property deed, which meant astonishingly that for 24 years I had unknowingly held legal control over the water supply for an entire neighborhood. Utility easements, you see, often bestow surprising legal powers upon original grantees, powers that can, and often do, override HOA authority, municipal regulations, and even certain state laws. The one who builds the road ultimately controls access to that road. It's a fundamental principle of property law that most people never consider until they desperately need it. The delicious irony was truly breathtaking. Valerie had spent months, threatening to cut off my water when I, all along, held the absolute legal authority to shut off her. Every single drop of water flowing into those million-dollar homes had to pass through the pipes situated on my property, under easements that I controlled. It was like watching a child defiantly threaten to ground their own parents. I spent the remainder of that night immersed in researching easement law, confirming every suspicion. Under state property law, easement holders can indeed restrict access for legitimate safety reasons, essential maintenance requirements, or even violations of easement terms. I possessed the undeniable legal right to temporarily shut down the entire water system for an infrastructure inspection, whenever I deemed it necessary. But here's the thing about 40 years in public service, you learn that power, unchecked by responsibility, is nothing more than brute bullying. I could have, with a single phone call to the county water department, the very next morning, summarily shut off service to Valerie's entire HOA out of sheer spite, a nuclear option, immediate satisfaction, total crushing victory. Instead, I opted for a more strategic deployment of this lever. The invigorating aroma of fresh coffee and the crisp morning lake air drifted through my kitchen windows as the sunrise painted the water in hues of liquid gold. Somewhere across that serene lake, Valerie Caldwell was likely sleeping soundly in her McMansion, utterly oblivious that the man she had tirelessly attempted to destroy held the power to transform her opulent lifestyle into a very expensive, very inconvenient camping experience. I carefully folded those survey maps, placed them meticulously in a manila envelope, and for the first time in months, a genuine smile touched my lips. It was time to impart a lesson.
Crafted plan. And after my astonishing discovery that I held the undisputed keys to Valerie's entire water kingdom, I needed to assemble the right team and execute this with surgical precision. My first call went directly to Jane Ramirez at the County Water Authority. We'd worked together for 15 years, and if anyone possessed an intimate understanding of the legal implications of utility easements, it was Jane. She readily agreed to meet me for coffee at Mabel's Diner, that quintessential local haunt where residents flock to escape tourists and, more importantly, HOA presidents. "Greg," she greeted, sliding into the booth across from me, her eyes sparkling. "I've been patiently waiting 20 years for someone to take Valerie down a few pegs. What do you need?" The tantalizing aroma of bacon grease and brewing coffee mingled with the exhilarating scent of conspiracy as I carefully spread the easement documents across the worn table. Jane's eyes widened, her gaze fixed on the survey maps. "Sweet mother of pearl," she whispered, almost reverently, "you control their entire water supply. We spent 2 intense hours meticulously mapping out the legal strategy. Under state law, easement holders could legitimately invoke emergency maintenance protocols for infrastructure safety. This meant I could legally restrict water access for inspection and repair purposes. The absolute key, we agreed, was executing it strictly by the book, armed with impeccable documentation and undeniable legitimate safety concerns. Jane enthusiastically agreed to provide technical support and crucial county backing for any maintenance decisions I made. More importantly, she offered to attend the next community meeting as an official observer, lending invaluable government credibility to whatever bombshell I chose to drop. Next, I recruited Fred Kowalski. Fred had endured Valerie's vicious harassment campaign firsthand and possessed the kind of unwavering military bearing that commanded instant respect. Plus, he knew where all the neighborhood skeletons were buried. Metaphorically speaking, of course. We met in his garage while he meticulously worked on his classic Mustang, the invigorating scent of motor oil and sheer determination filling the air. "You want to take her down?" he asked, not even glancing up from the engine. "Count me in." That woman utterly destroyed my family's peace of mind. Fred's role was crucial: intelligence gathering and community coordination. He had invaluable contacts among the old-timers who remembered the original lake development, and he could subtly organize support without alerting Valerie's insidious spy network. Helen Miller became our indispensable communications hub. At 78, she had the perfect cover, a seemingly harmless old lady. But Helen ran the neighborhood gossip network with the efficiency of a CIA operation. Her house swiftly became our unofficial headquarters, with the added, delightful benefit of fresh-baked apple pie during our strategic planning sessions. "Honey," she said, pouring coffee as we reviewed our timeline, "I've watched that woman terrorize this community for 8 long years. It's high time someone reminded her that respect, darling, works both ways." Dan Miller from Miller's Hardware provided invaluable technical support and equipment. It turned out Dan had a background in municipal engineering before opening his store, so he understood the intricate workings of water systems perfectly. He also had access to the kind of professional-grade equipment that would lend an undeniable air of officialdom to our documentation. "Here's something most people don't know," Dan explained, as we examined pressure gauges and flow meters. "Municipal water systems have master shutoffs every 500 to 1,000 feet for maintenance purposes. They're usually disguised as innocuous utility boxes or manholes that nobody ever pays attention to. The sheer elegance of our plan lay in its simplicity. We had no intention of sabotaging anything or causing actual harm. Instead, we would invoke legitimate maintenance protocols that would undeniably demonstrate precisely who held the real power in this bitter neighborhood dispute. Our diligent research revealed that Valerie had, in her characteristic arrogance, never bothered to check the original infrastructure easements when she purchased her property. Title insurance companies are legally required to provide copies of all easement documents, but most people, unfortunately, never bother to request them. A colossal mistake when you're planning to wage war against your neighbor. We spent 3 meticulous weeks preparing documentation that would withstand any conceivable legal challenge. County Water Department inspection forms, comprehensive infrastructure safety checklists, detailed maintenance scheduling protocols, everything an experienced water systems engineer would require to justify temporary service restrictions. The psychological strategy was equally paramount. We decided to let Valerie fully believe she was winning, right up until the exact moment we unveiled our trump card. Fred would subtly spread rumors through his network that I was considering selling, that I was exhausted and tired of fighting. Helen would casually mention to her bridge club that I seemed defeated, utterly ready to give up. Meanwhile, I relentlessly practiced my presentation until I could deliver the complex technical information with the calm, unwavering authority of someone who had dedicated 4 decades to managing critical infrastructure. No emotion, no personal attacks, just pure professional competence explaining undeniable reality to people who had been living in Valerie's self-serving fantasy world. The final critical piece was time. We needed maximum witnesses for the earth-shattering revelation, which meant patiently waiting for the next scheduled HOA meeting. But we also needed to meticulously coordinate with county officials and local media to ensure the story was told accurately and effectively. As I sat on my dock that evening, watching the sunset paint the lake in glorious gold, while the haunting calls of loons echoed in the distance, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Genuine excitement, not for petty revenge but for true justice, for teaching a profound lesson about respect and community that would ultimately benefit everyone on this lake. The familiar crunch of gravel under my boots as I walked back to the cabin sounded different somehow, like the inexorable footsteps of inevitability. Valerie Caldwell was about to learn that true power doesn't emanate from bullying. It stems from knowing, unequivocally, what you're talking about. Game time was rapidly approaching. You know that ancient saying about giving someone enough rope to hang themselves? Well, Valerie Caldwell was about to meticulously weave herself a noose out of pure, unadulterated arrogance and blinding overconfidence. Word had, precisely as planned, filtered back to her through the intricate neighborhood gossip network. I was broken, utterly defeated, and ready to surrender. Fred had executed his role flawlessly, letting slip at the marina that I'd been discreetly inquiring about real estate agents, appearing utterly crushed by all the relentless legal pressure. Helen had casually mentioned to her bridge club that I looked weary and was likely going to sell and relocate somewhere quieter. Valerie predictably swallowed the bait whole, like a ravenous bass snatching a perfectly presented look. Instead of quietly savoring her victory and moving on to her next victim, she decided to orchestrate a grand public spectacle of my supposed defeat. She promptly called an emergency HOA meeting for the following Thursday, ostensibly to formalize water usage enforcement actions, but in reality to parade my surrender triumphantly before the entire community. But here's where her colossal ego completely eclipsed her strategic thinking. She invited county officials, not just to observe but to witness what she grandiosely termed effective environmental enforcement. She contacted the local newspaper, not just to report but to meticulously document her successful protection of community resources. She even arranged for the cable access TV crew to film the entire meeting, for posterity of course. Valerie Caldwell was about to create the most thoroughly documented case of public humiliation in the annals of HOA history. The harassment campaign leading up to the meeting was relentless, almost frenzied, and increasingly desperate. Anonymous complaints began flooding the county about my property, fabricated noise violations for my morning coffee routine, ludicrous health hazards from my humble vegetable garden, absurd environmental concerns about my bird feeders attracting disease-carrying wildlife. Someone even cut my phone line on Tuesday night. I captured it all on the security camera Dan Miller had helped me install,
a shadowy figure in dark clothing, wielding bolt cutters, working stealthily by flashlight. The footage wasn't clear enough to identify the person, but the timing was suspiciously convenient for Valerie's narrative about my deteriorating mental state. Wednesday morning brought a code enforcement officer to my door responding to a fresh wave of complaints about structural safety violations and potential health hazards. The poor man looked utterly embarrassed as he explained he was legally obligated to investigate every complaint, even the most transparently frivolous ones. "Miss Thornton," he sighed, checking items off his clipboard with the enthusiasm of someone tackling dreadful homework. "I'm required to inspect your septic system, electrical panels and structural integrity, all based on anonymous reports of dangerous conditions." I offered him coffee while he conducted his inspection, chatting casually about his job and the truly ridiculous complaints he was forced to investigate. It turned out he'd been receiving 3 to 4 calls a week about my property for the past month, all originating from the same anonymous phone number, though the caller steadfastly refused to identify herself. The inspection predictably revealed precisely what any sane person would expect: a meticulously maintained cabin with modern electrical, a perfectly functioning septic system, and structural integrity that could likely endure another 6 decades. He simply wrote no violations found on every line of his report and genuinely apologized for wasting my time. Meanwhile, Valerie was tirelessly making the rounds of newer residents, meticulously painting herself as the valiant defender of property values against my disruptive presence. She hosted informal coffee meetings in her lavish living room, selectively showcasing photos of my property, carefully chosen to make it appear shabby and unkempt compared to the manicured lawns of the McMansion crowd. Her ultimate masterstroke was the press release she triumphantly dispatched to local media: "HOA successfully resolves water conservation dispute through firm community standards enforcement." According to her version of events, I had graciously agreed to comply with all regulations and would be bringing my property into alignment with community expectations. Complete utter fiction, of course, but she was so utterly consumed by her impending victory that she was already writing the history books. The beautiful poetic irony was that while Valerie was consumed with planning her grand victory celebration, I was meticulously putting the finishing touches on documentation that would expose her entire power structure as nothing more than an illusion, built on a foundation of ignorance and intimidation. Jane Ramirez stopped by Wednesday evening to meticulously review our presentation material. The crisp scent of fresh ink on official county water department letterhead mingled with the soft evening lake breeze as we went through our checklist one final critical time. "You know," she mused, carefully organizing the official documents that would undeniably legitimize everything we were about to do, "in 30 years of water management, I have genuinely never witnessed someone dig their own grave quite this thoroughly." She's invited every single official witness she could possibly think of to watch her get publicly humiliated. That night, I sat on my dock with a glass of wine, listening to the mournful calls of the loons echoing across the water, which shimmered with stars like scattered diamonds. Tomorrow I would walk into that community center, projecting the image of a defeated old man, utterly ready to surrender. I would allow Valerie her moment of triumphant glory, let her fully commit to her self-aggrandizing narrative of dominance and control, and then only then would I reveal to her what true power looked like. The crunch of gravel under my feet as I walked back to the cabin sounded different somehow, imbued with a new purpose, like the inexorable footsteps of justice finally catching up to someone who had spent far too long believing her own self-serving propaganda. Valerie Caldwell was about to learn that the most dangerous opponent is always the one who cunningly allows you to believe you've already won. Thursday evening arrived, cloaked in the kind of crisp, sharp autumn air that makes everything feel more vivid, more intensely real. Perfect weather, I thought, for what was about to become the most spectacular public meltdown in the entire history of Whisper Lake Estates. I arrived at the community center a full 30 minutes early, carrying a worn leather briefcase that looked like it had seen better decades. Inside were the meticulously prepared documents that would change absolutely everything. But from the outside, I appeared exactly as Valerie expected: a tired, defeated old man, ready to wave the white flag of surrender. Valerie, ever the showwoman, had transformed the meeting into a full-blown multimedia production. She'd brought a locksmith, a water system technician who bore a suspicious resemblance to the handyman from her own property management company, and enough official-looking paperwork to stock a small law office. The local newspaper photographer was busily setting up his equipment, while the cable access TV crew meticulously tested their camera. She'd even arranged the seating with strategic precision, her unwavering supporters clustered in the front rows for maximum intimidation, with newer residents, blissfully unaware of the full story, filling the middle section. My allies were carefully scattered throughout the room, maintaining the illusion that community support for me had completely evaporated. The turnout was truly incredible. 86 people packed into a space designed for 60, with folks standing along the walls and crowding the very entrance. Word had spread like wildfire that this would be the final dramatic confrontation, and no one wanted to miss the show. Valerie opened the meeting, resplendent in her finest courtroom attire, a crisp navy blue suit, a pearl necklace, and that ubiquitous clipboard clutched like a scepter of absolute authority. She'd prepared what sounded remarkably like a victory speech, complete with grandiloquent references to protecting our community's future and the paramount importance of standards in maintaining property value. Tonight, she announced, her voice resonating with the smug satisfaction of someone utterly convinced of her triumph, we will formalize the water usage enforcement action that will set a crucial precedent for responsible environmental stewardship in our beloved community. She then gestured towards me with a theatrical, condescending concern. Mr. Thornton has indicated his willingness to comply with all regulations and bring his property into alignment with community expectations. This, dear neighbors, represents a victory for every family that proudly calls Whisper Lake Estates home. The crowd murmured its approval precisely as she had choreographed. Her loyal supporters nodded sagely, while the newer residents looked visibly relieved that the troublemaker had finally been brought to heel. That's when she made her fatal, irrevocable mistake. Before we formalize this resolution, Valerie continued, pulling out what appeared to be an official water.
When community standards are threatened, she signaled imperiously to her handyman, who, with an almost comical flourish, produced a large wrench and began to move towards the door. We possess the undeniable legal right and the profound community responsibility to shut off water service to properties that steadfastly refuse to comply with conservation regulations. The room fell into an eerie silence, broken only by the faint whir of camera motors and the nervous scratch of pens on notepads. Valerie was about to order the physical disconnection of my water service, live in front of 86 witnesses and 3 different media outlets. Any final comments before we proceed? She asked, her gaze fixed directly on me, her triumph barely concealed. I rose slowly, pulling my worn briefcase onto the table with the deliberate movements of someone far older and more defeated than I actually felt. Well, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, there is one small technical detail we should probably discuss first. Valerie's smile widened, a predatory grin. She was expecting my surrender speech, my final pathetic capitulation. Instead, I opened my briefcase and, with deliberate slowness, pulled out the laminated survey documents, the official county water department letterhead, and the meticulously organized easement records that Jane Ramirez had helped me assemble into an impressive presentation package. Has anyone here, I asked, my voice suddenly stronger, clearer, imbued with decades of professional authority, actually checked who controls the water line you're threatening to shut off? The silence stretched, long and tense, forcing people to shift uncomfortably in their chairs. Valerie's confident, self-assured expression began to show the first, subtle cracks of uncertainty. I slowly unfolded the large survey map across the table, the rustle of paper amplified by the sudden, intense attention of the room. According to county records filed in 1963, I stated, my voice ringing with undeniable truth, and further confirmed by the Water Authority this very week, I hold perpetual easement rights over the main water lines serving this entire neighborhood. You could have heard a pin drop on the carpet. Miss Caldwell, I continued, pulling out my retired county water department badge and placing it deliberately next to the documents. You've spent months threatening to cut off my water. But here's the thing. I paused, letting the weight of my words hang in the air. I designed this system 35 years ago. Every pipe, every valve, every pressure regulation point. The handyman with the wrench had frozen mid-stride, staring at me as if I had just announced I was, in fact, Superman. The main water line serving all 47 properties in this HOA runs directly through my land, under easements that grant me legal authority over its maintenance, access, and yes, emergency shutoffs. I looked directly into Valerie's eyes, her face now ashen, pale as fresh snow. You want to shut off my water? That's interesting, because as of Monday morning, I will be conducting a comprehensive safety inspection of the entire system. County regulations, you see, require a 72-hour service interruption for proper testing. The beautiful, breathtaking irony hung heavy in the air, like morning mist over the lake. Miss Caldwell, you don't control my water. I control yours. The silence that followed my revelation was the kind of absolute dead quiet you only experience right before something explosively dramatic occurs. 86 people held their breath, their collective consciousness slowly processing the profound implications of what I had just declared. Valerie's face cycled through a spectacular kaleidoscope of emotions, confusion, then disbelief, quickly followed by sheer panic and finally a desperate, raw anger that made her voice crack when she attempted to respond. That's impossible, she stammered, her professional composure evaporating like steam. HOA authority supersedes individual property rights. You can't just, this is ridiculous. Jane Ramirez, a beacon of calm authority, stood up from the back of the room, her county water department uniform instantly lending irrefutable credibility to the proceedings. Actually, Miss Caldwell, Jane stated firmly, Mr. Thornton is absolutely correct. I have personally reviewed the easement documentation and it is all legitimate and properly filed. She walked forward carrying an official folder with the county seal prominently visible for all to see. Utility easements, Jane explained, her voice steady, predate HOA authority by state law. The infrastructure serving this neighborhood crosses Mr. Thornton's property under legal agreements that unequivocally grant him maintenance authority over the entire system. The newspaper photographer's camera flash began firing rapidly, capturing Valerie's deer-in-headlights expression with merciless precision. The cable access crew frantically repositioned their equipment, eager to capture better angles of what was undeniably becoming the most dramatic HOA meeting in local history. That's when Fred Kowalski, his military bearing commanding immediate attention, stood up. She pulled the exact same scheme on my family 3 years ago, he declared, his voice ringing with righteous indignation. Fake violations, endless harassment, threats of shutoffs, all to force us out so her developer friends could buy our property cheap. A powerful murmur rippled through the crowd as other voices began to join in. Carlos, the disabled veteran, held up a thick folder. I've got documentation going back 5 years. She's been systematically targeting anyone who doesn't fit her vision of what this community should look like. The elderly Henderson couple stood together, their voices trembling with raw emotion. She fined us for growing tomatoes in our own backyard, the husband exclaimed. Said vegetable gardens were incompatible with lakefront aesthetic. What began as isolated, hesitant testimonies quickly escalated into an unstoppable avalanche of grievances, as more and more residents found the courage to speak up. Valerie had, over the years, created so many enemies that fully half the room had personal horror stories to share. But Valerie, in her desperation, wasn't finished. Desperate people, after all, do desperate things. She launched into a frantic counterattack that revealed just how far she was truly willing to go to cling to her rapidly eroding control. This man is clearly suffering from grief-induced mental instability, she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. His wife's death has obviously affected his judgment. He's dangerous to this community. The room fell into a dead silence once more, but this time, the quiet felt different. Colder, sharper, undeniably hostile. She had just crossed a line, a sacred boundary that even her most ardent supporters could not and would not defend. Furthermore, she continued, apparently oblivious to the irreparable damage she was inflicting upon herself, I have contacts in the county attorney's office. This supposed easement nonsense won't hold up to proper legal scrutiny. I'll have injunctions filed by Monday morning. That's when County Sheriff Mike Davidson, who had been standing quietly by the door for crowd control, stepped forward. Ms. Caldwell, he stated calmly, his voice resonating with quiet authority, I think you should know that Ramirez here has been meticulously documenting your false complaints to various county departments for the past 3 years. He pulled out his own folder, thick with incident reports. Filing false emergency reports is a misdemeanor,
Harassment of elderly residents is a felony. We've been building a comprehensive case against you for quite some time. The color drained from Valerie's face completely as the terrifying realization dawned. Her carefully cultivated network of official connections had in fact become an inescapable web of damning evidence against her. But I wasn't done yet. I had been patient, professional, and painstakingly restrained throughout this entire grueling ordeal. Now it was time for the definitive mic drop moment. This situation so richly deserved. I stood up, pulled out the master water system diagram I had personally helped design decades ago, and spread it across the table for everyone to see. The rustle of the paper seemed unnaturally loud in the tense, silent room. "Ms. Caldwell," I said, my voice resonating with the calm, unwavering authority of 4 decades in public service, "you have threatened my home. You have viciously attacked my character, and you have unforgivably dishonored my wife's memory." I paused, letting my words sink in. "You have terrorized this community for years, hiding behind fake authority and fabricating regulations." I pointed to the diagram, tracing the waterline with my finger. "But here's what you never bothered to learn about the infrastructure you so confidently believed you control. This main line has a master shutoff valve, located exactly here." I tapped a spot on my property, right next to my tool shed. The room was so incredibly quiet you could almost hear the fluorescent lights humming overhead. I possessed the legal authority, the technical knowledge, and the undeniable moral justification to shut off water to this entire neighborhood. But unlike you, Ms. Caldwell, I believe in using power responsibly. I looked directly into her stunned eyes. "Consider this your unequivocal notice. The harassment stops now. The fake violations end today, and if you ever mention my wife again, you will discover just how profoundly uncomfortable life can become when your water pressure mysteriously begins to have problems." Spontaneous, thunderous applause erupted from the crowd, starting with Fred Kowalski and spreading through the room like a joyous wildfire. Even some of Valerie's former supporters were clapping, their faces reflecting a dawning realization of who the true bully had been all along. Justice, served ice cold, with impeccable timing. The aftermath of that monumental meeting unfolded like a perfectly choreographed sequence of falling dominoes. Within 48 hours, Valerie Caldwell submitted her resignation from the HOA board, citing personal reasons, though everyone knew the real reason was that staying would have meant facing a recall vote she couldn't possibly win. Her high-powered law firm quietly dropped all pending legal actions, likely after someone finally explained the stark difference between actual law and HOA wishful thinking. The county attorney's office, meanwhile, opted not to pursue harassment charges, provided Valerie agreed to 200 hours of community service, specifically helping with the very lake conservation project she'd spent years falsely claiming to champion. Sometimes, the universe possesses a sense of humor that would make even Shakespeare green with envy. The new HOA board election was a thing of sheer beauty. Fred Kowalski ran for president on a platform of neighbors helping neighbors instead of neighbors terrorizing neighbors. He won by a landslide, securing 83. The new bylaws were swiftly amended to include term limits, crucial transparency requirements, and my personal favorite, a rule mandating that any enforcement action had to be approved by a resounding 60% of residents, not just whoever happened to wield a clipboard that week. It turned out that HOA bylaws could indeed be amended if 75% of owners voted for changes, a crucial detail Valerie had conveniently forgotten to mention during her 8-year reign of terror. The community wholeheartedly adopted what we proudly called the Neighbor First policy, which prioritized genuine assistance and shared education over punitive fines and relentless harassment. But here's where the story truly becomes inspiring. I utilized my newfound reputation as the man who brought down the neighborhood tyrant to propose something the community had never dared to consider, a complete, much-needed upgrade of the very water system I'd been legally responsible for all along. Leveraging my easement authority and 4 decades of unparalleled engineering experience, I coordinated a voluntary infrastructure improvement project that ultimately saved every household approximately $400. The new, energy-efficient pumps hummed quietly, a stark contrast to the old system's constant, groaning complaints, and the state-of-the-art digital monitoring equipment I installed meant no more mysterious pressure drops or baffling water quality issues. The entire project cost the community nothing beyond the materials. I happily donated my labor as a heartfelt gift to neighbors who had finally learned the true meaning of neighborliness. Most importantly, I established the Mary Thornton Lake Conservation Scholarship in my dear wife's memory. The fund now proudly sponsors environmental engineering studies for local students, and it's already helping 3 bright young minds pursue fulfilling careers in water resource management. Mary always believed that education was the finest investment in any community's future. The annual Lake Community Day Festival we started has blossomed into the neighborhood's biggest, most anticipated event. Instead of dreading HOA meetings focused on nitpicking violations and petty complaints, we now enjoy vibrant potluck dinners, collaborative group dock maintenance project, and a robust winter emergency response network that genuinely helps people instead of fining them for snow removal violations. The comforting aroma of grilled burgers, mingling with the joyful sound of children laughing and playing by the water, has replaced the suffocating tension and fear that Valerie's regime had created. Property values have actually increased, not because of aggressive enforcement, but because people genuinely desire to live in a community where neighbors actively support each other through difficulties, instead of punishing differences. As for Valerie herself, she quietly moved away after her husband received a promotion that necessitated relocating to another state. Word has it she's considerably quieter in her new neighborhood, though whether that's a genuine change of heart or simply a more refined strategy remains to be seen. Bullies don't always learn, but they can, most certainly, be stopped when communities collectively refuse to tolerate their behavior. The true lesson here isn't merely about water rights or HOA politics. It's about the profound courage of standing up to individuals who ruthlessly wield authority to intimidate others. Every homeowner, I implore you, should meticulously read their property deed and thoroughly understand utility easements, because knowledge truly is power when someone attempts to push you around. But more than that, communities are at their absolute strongest when they fiercely protect members who are struggling, not when they cruelly attack people for being different. I'm happily back to my morning routine now. Coffee on the dock at sunrise, listening to the melodic calls of loons across water that reflects a sky brimming with endless possibility. The cabin that Valerie so desperately tried to force me out of has, against all odds, become the vibrant heart of a community that relearned how to genuinely care about each other. And every morning, when I scatter birdseed for the undesirable wildlife that brings this lake to life, I remember Mary's favorite saying, "Kindness is a choice, but so is cruelty. Choose wisely." So here's my challenge to you. Drop a comment below, sharing your own HOA horror story. You are not alone, and sometimes all it takes is one brave person willing to stand up to change absolutely everything. Hit subscribe if you want to hear about the time my neighbor tried to claim ownership of my driveway using adverse possession law. That's next week's story. And trust me, it gets even more ridiculous than this one. You've been watching HOA Stories. We're entitled Karens Get a Much-Needed Reality Check. If this episode filled you with secondhand rage or profound satisfaction, hit that like button, leave your take in the comments, and subscribe so you're the very first in line for more weekly HOA chaos with us.